Thank you for inviting me. And can you hear me okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So I have been studying sperm whales for over 30, well, nearly 40 years now. And it's a slow process. But gradually we find out something about these animals, and I'm going to tell you the bit that excites me the most today about sperm whale clans. So what I will do is first talk about sperm whales, and then sperm whale clans. And then I'll discuss some new ideas about what a society is. And then from that leads a parallel to another set of societies, those of us humans. So I'll talk about parallels and contrasts, and then think about what we sperm whale scientists can learn from all the work that's been done on humans, and perhaps at the end suggest how it could be the other way around. So, sperm whales, they're extreme in many, many ways. They're most phylogenetically divergent species of all the whales and dolphins around today. They're the largest toothed animal, the largest brain on Earth. They have the largest nose on Earth, which it turns out is a fantastic sonar system, which can make the highest sound pressure of any animal. Other stuff too, they have the greatest sexual segregation of any animal. The female sperm whales and the young are mostly in the tropics and occasionally in the subtropics, whereas the males are mostly at high latitudes. So of Newfoundland, it's very, very, very rare you find anything except a male. They are also highly social, and it's this aspect of their lives that has particularly fascinated me. So before I start on what we found and what we think, I'm going to say a little bit of how we collect our data. So we do this from a 12-meter ocean-going sailing boat. And we usually have a crew of 5 and go out for about 2 to 3 weeks at a time. We can follow the groups of sperm whales around by just listening to their vocalization. So this is entirely passive tracking. In the daytime, we can also see them. We've worked in a number of parts of the world, but the part that has been most productive and most fun is off the Galapagos Islands, off Ecuador, on the equator. And so this is our research vessel off the Galapagos, and with a group of sperm whales. This photograph was taken in 1995, but we use the same vessel and go to the same places. Well, we were last there in 2023. So sperm whales are extremely social. We had a pretty good idea of this from our earlier work, but in the last few years, we've started to be able to use drones to photograph them. And as they seem to be mainly social at the surface, we get a good picture of what's going on. And putting that together with our photo identifications of them, so we can identify the animals from the patterns on their flukes, their tails, we can build up a model of their social structure. The foundation of it is what we call the social unit, which is about 10 females and their offspring. These females are often, but not always, matrilineally related. So especially in the Atlantic, a social unit may consist of a grandmother, her daughters, their daughters and sons, and so on. In the Pacific, where whaling is has been more recent, and a large number of animals were taken a little before we started our studies, but these are long-lived animals, so this keeps going. They're not as matrilineally based, and we think this may be to do with the destruction of the groups of the units by the whalers. The members of a unit move together, and they can move just a short distance, or we've seen units move several thousand kilometers. While they're doing this, and yes, most of the sperm whales seem to be pretty nomadic, especially the females. They're moving over quite large bits of ocean in no particular seasonal rhythm. While they're moving around like this, they babysit for each other's calves. Female sperm whales, well, male sperm whales too, dive deep to eat mesopelagic and bathypelagic fish, squid, and they're down for about 40 minutes. The young usually at the surface during this period, and typically there's other sperm whales around the young when the mother is diving. But it's also hard to discover the mother in these species, at least from just observing them, because there's a lot of allosuckling. So not only do the calf go to other individuals, not their mother, but they may suckle from other animals, not their mother. So there's a lot of communal care for the young. They also defend themselves communally if they're attacked by killer whales or sometimes other things, but killer whales are the main threat. They will defend themselves communally. Often they'll put themselves in a very tight group and put the calves in the middle. We also believe that information exchange is really important to these animals. So the members of a social unit have a communal amount of information, communal set of information, which they use for things like how to defend themselves against predators, where to go as resources wax and wane, and how to just conduct their lives. However, although the social unit is the fundamental structure, social structure for these animals, that's not how it appears, at least on brief observation, when you find them at sea. There can be a lot more than 10 animals. So here's a drone picture taken off the Galapagos a couple of years ago. And there are about 60 animals in this picture. So maybe 6 social units. And perhaps one can envisage which groups are which social units, but it's not entirely clear. So these matrilineal social units group with one another for periods from hours to days. So that's the fundamental picture of the female social structure. Males are very different, and if someone's interested, they can ask afterwards. I can say a little bit about males. But let's keep on with the females. Our deepest insights into the social structures of these animals has been driven by a vocalization we hear from them. What have been called codas. It's not terribly appropriate given what a musical coda is, but that's the name they've been given. And while a sperm whale makes a series of clicks, click, 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 for echolocation to find its food, and this is the most powerful sound of any animal, They also use these clicks when they're socializing at the surface. They make them less powerful, and they put them in patterns. And I'm going to try and play some. Maybe I will, someone can tell me if they come through, or raise your thumb or something. So I hope it sounds like you did hear that, and that was a couple of sperm whales having a interchange with one another. They were making these patterns back and forth. Well, these have intrigued people ever since they were discovered in the 1970s, these patterns. They've intrigued us, and we've had various hypotheses, as have other people, about what they're used for. But in 2001, Luke Rendell, who was then a graduate student here at Dal, and I made our big discovery when we looked at the codas recorded from the different social units and groups of social units of the Galapagos. This allowed us into the world of the clans. This was the pattern we saw. So what we see here is a chart with the vertical columns being the social units. So the first one is social unit A. So that's 10 or so females and their offspring going around together. The second one's unit S. The third one's A2B. That's when A split a bit and joined unit B for a while as a group. And then it's I and L as a group, and so on. So these columns are the different social units. The rows are the different codotypes. So the top one's 3R, which is perhaps the simplest coda that we consider. Click, click, click. The second one is 2 + 1, click, 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 and so on down to 7 ++ 1, which is click, 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 click. Okay. So a circle here means that that unit made that coda. If it's filled in, it means it was more than 10% of the repertoire. So this was our discovery. If you look at the filled circles of the units in green on the left, they include 5R, 5 regularly spaced clicks, 6R, 7R, and a version of 8R. So these social units are mainly making just clicks, regularly spaced, click, 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 and so on, in a sequence. In blue are another bunch of social units who make a different pattern: 4 + 1, 5 + 1, and 6 + 1. So the 4 + 1 goes click, 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 click. So there's a pause before the last click, maybe the Canadian A. Anyway, we found these patterns, and they are consistent. The same unit makes the same pattern in different years. And we called them the regular clan and the +1 clan, very +1 clan, most originally. And then we started to relate this to social structures and other things to see what was going on here. What is the real difference between these two clans? And first, we knew that they're both found off the Galapagos, and they could both be found off the Galapagos at the same time. So in that sense, they're sympatric. But when we looked at which social units formed groups which other social units, so these are the social units in this network diagram. The circles are the big circles are the social units. The little squares and circles are the individuals within the social units, and the lines are the recorded associations. So most of the associations are within social units, but some are between. And you can see two social units who spend a lot of time together. That's the A and B ones we met earlier. But if you notice, there's a bunch at the top who associate with one another, and the bunch at the bottom who don't seem to associate much, but if they do, it's with each other. Now, on the right here are similar pattern, same social units, but we have the acoustic similarity. You can see the ones at the top are pretty similar acoustically to each other, the ones at the bottom acoustically similar. The ones at the top are the regular clan units, the ones at the bottom are the +1 units. So the regular clan, regularly spaced. Here's this slight gap before the last click for the +1 clan. What is going on here? We've got these two bunches of whales in the same area, but not associating. Could they be subspecies or some real genetic difference between them? But in fact, in nuclear DNA, there is absolutely no difference between them. In mitochondrial DNA, there is some difference, which suggests that a female stays in the clan that she was born in with her mother, which makes sense because they're in these social units for their lifetimes, but that they may mate with a male who was originally from another clan. So this means that we cannot explain differences between the clans genetically. The only way to explain these differences is that it's learned. And of course it makes sense. The young sperm whale learns its dialect from its mother, the other females in its social unit as it grows up. That's culture, social learning. Well, we then looked at other things about these clans, other ways they might be different. There's a sort of microhabitat difference. So the regular clan are found more in waters near the islands. These gray blobs are the Galapagos Islands themselves. The green ones are the regular, closer to the islands. The yellow ones are the +1, further offshore. Move differently. So over periods of a few hours to a few months to a few years, the +1 move much further than the regular clan. So if we're following them, which we do, it's actually much easier to follow a +1 group or social unit because they tend to move in straight lines. The regular ones wiggle around. And then over longer time periods, this is propagated. The +1s may have moved a very long distance, the regular rather shorter. Feeding success also varies between the social units. And I've illustrated this on the right by the feeding success in 1989. You may wonder how we measure feeding success in a whale that's feeding 500, 1,000 meters below the surface where we can't see what's going on. Well, what we do is measure brown patches, especially the defecation rate at the surface, on the basis that what came out must have gone in. And so the scale on these diagrams is what proportion of the flukes, that's the times when they dive, have shit in them. And in 1989, on the right, which was a normal fairly cool La Nina type year off the Galapagos, the regular clan were having brown patches in their places where they dived about 20% of the time, whereas for the +1 it was about 6% of the time, and there's very little overlap between the two. In 1987, which was 2 years earlier, it was an El Nino year, and the water's warm. It's bad for everything off the Galapagos, including the sperm whale. Most of the days we followed them, we saw no brown patches for the regular clan, but the +1 were doing a little bit better. So we've got a differential feeding success with one clan doing better in the normal years, the other doing better in the El Nino years. We looked at reproductive success, the number of calves, and the +1, as you can see, almost every group has a calf in it, but it's only about half of the regular groups. So there's a big difference here. Why is this? It could be due to feeding success in bad years, but it could also be related to how they protect the calves. So we've looked for measures in differences in social behavior. So this is a measure of dive synchrony. So how synchronously the dives are. So high value means the sperm whales in the social unit or the group make their dives together, and a low value means that they spread them out. And each dive is about 40 minutes long. So, and they spend about 8 minutes at the surface between. A low dive synchrony is probably a lot better for babysitting because there's more likely to be animals at the surface than the high dive synchrony. So this may also partially explain the difference in reproductive success. We've looked at a number of other characteristics of behavior and found some indications of other difference, but these are the main ones we found. This discovery of clans, as I say, happened in about 2001 off using data from Galapagos. But over the next decade or so, others in other parts of the world were finding very similar things going on. So the red is our study area off Galapagos as well as mainland Ecuador. But studies in Chile and the Caribbean by ourselves, studies in Brazil, Mauritius, and Japan by others have all found more than one clan in the same area. And in a paper a couple of years ago by Taylor Hirsch and many others, this was elaborated for the Pacific Ocean. So Taylor got together data from a whole range of collaborators right across the Pacific, from Japan to Chile, from British Columbia to New Zealand, and used a quantitative technique to allocate the whales herd to different clans. She found 7 clans. And these include our regular and +1 clans, but 5 others. And she plotted them across the Pacific. And this is what she found. And as you can see, there's clans right across the Pacific. Some colors seem to be common to other different areas. And in many areas, there's more than one color. There's an inset for the Galapagos Islands showing lots of colors because most of these clans are found off the Galapagos Islands at one time or another. She's now using data with an extra 20 years of recordings from the original studies. So what does this mean? In the Pacific, there are about 7 clans, and there are also about 150,000 females. Both of those are a bit rough, but it suggests there are about 20,000 females per clan. That's an extraordinarily large social system. And I'll get onto this again in a minute. A social entity, I guess, an element of a social system. Also, if you look at the difference in distributions between the different clans, again, there are major differences. So the red oval is for the short clan, which is found all the way from Japan to British Columbia to Galapagos to Chile to New Zealand and in between. In contrast, the blue oval is the +1 clan, the one who I played briefly earlier from the Galapagos. They are only found off the Galapagos and mainland Ecuador. So I suspect that the short clan has a lot more than 20,000 females because it covers over 10,000 kilometers, whereas the +1 clan probably has a lot less than 20,000 females because it just covers 1,000 kilometers. Now, here's our picture for the Pacific. We've also been working in the Atlantic, and in particular in a little study area, which you may not be able to see this, is shown by a little light blue rectangle on the right of the map. I've blown it out now on the right. This is our Atlantic study area, which is the waters of the Lesser Antilles from St. Kitts to Grenada. This is absolutely tiny by the scale of the Pacific, and we expected to find a mix of the two clans that are known to inhabit this waters, EC1 and EC2. But that wasn't the case. There were islands where we only found EC1 and other islands where we only found EC2, and this was consistent over years. So something really quite different is happening in the Atlantic. There's many other differences between the Atlantic and the Pacific. The groups are much smaller. Rather than about 40 animals in the Pacific, usually in the Atlantic, it's just one social unit, 10 or so animals. Another really interesting difference is look at how the clans are discriminated. In the Pacific, they are by what we call motifs. So we've talked about the regular clan, click, 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 but it can be with 4 clicks or 9 clicks or whatever. The +1, again, any number of clicks, but that pause before the last one. The 4+, you do 4 clicks and then you do something else. The slow increasing, which is just as it appears, click, slowly increasing the interval between the clicks, click, 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 click. And then the palindrome, the one that I like most, which is one which looks pretty much the same if you play it forwards and backwards. And then there's the short clan, just short coders. That's the clan that Taylor Hirsch thinks is the basal clan, and the others may have evolved from it. In contrast, in the Atlantic, each of the clans has a single identity coda. Although there's several marked here for EC1, they are all actually the same, just shorter or longer. They're 1 + 1 + 3. Click, 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 click. And EC2, again, has a regular 5 regularly spaced clicks and so on. So we have a really different pattern where just one coda is the key thing in the Atlantic. In the Pacific, it seems these motifs make more sense. Now, Taylor Hirsch, when she's figuring out which clan's which, she has a routine which produces identity coders and non-identity coders. The identity coders are made primarily by one clan, but occasionally by others. The non-identity coders are made at reasonable rates by a number of the clans. And so here she plots clan spatial overlap. So you can see each of the blobs has two colors. So if it's red, it's green and blue, that's the regular and the +1. And she plotted their coda usage similarity, and it declines. So what this means is that two clans who spend time in the same area make much less use of each other's coders than two clans which rarely see each other because they're typically in different parts of the ocean. That's not the case with the non-identity coders. This suggests that identity coders are symbolic markers of clan identity, because this is the pattern we find with symbolic markers of ethno-linguistic identity in humans. Human languages or the colors used by sports teams are less similar if they're in the same area, and can be quite similar if they're from quite different areas. So sperm whale clans have characteristic behavior. They're learned from the mother, social unit from other social units in the clan. They delineate social relationships, and they seem to be a fundamental element of sperm whale life. We are fascinated by them, we sperm whale scientists, and we do this to understand sperm whales, which are themselves a big puzzle to us, but the clans seem to be a large part of what they are. We also study them to look at how cultural evolution can work in non-human species. Because the clans are very similar in nuclear genes and use the same environments, neither of these is supported as driving differences between clans. So if we find differences between the clans, it looks as though culture is behind it. And this is a route into figuring out how culture works in a non-human species. Well, I'm now going to talk about an element of this, which came up in the last year or so, society. So I and others have used the word society very loosely as more or less the same as social structure or social organization. But Mark Moffat, in what I think is a key paper in 2024, proposed a definition for society that a society is a group whose constituent individuals recognize one another as members. And this is a really interesting idea, that if you can tell who is in your society and who isn't, that is a society. And he also adds, and that maintain control over access to a physical space. I don't like that part because it suggests territoriality, and territoriality is, yes, it's usual amongst mammals and a lot of other animals on the land, but in the ocean, there's almost no territoriality other than on the benthos. So our commentary on his paper, Sam Walmsley and I suggest ditching this last part, and I think he's more or less in agreement with us. So the key element of a society is, you know, who else is in your society. And Moffat then brings up the really interesting idea of an anonymous society. Because you can have a society which everyone knows who's in the society because there aren't very many, and you know Joe's in my society, but Susie isn't, and so on. But that only works with just a few individuals that you can identify individually. And an anonymous society means that the members do not recognize each other individually. So they know who's in their society, but they don't know who everybody in their society is. To do this, you need some kind of symbolic markers. And invertebrates, these seem to be cultural. They're things learned from each other. So we can think of the symbolic markers for human societies, like things like dialects and dress and diet and so on. Anonymous societies are rare. There are not too many cases where this seems to be happening. And obviously the predominant case, and a lot of Moffat's article is about us, about humans, but he also talks about sperm whales. And I think this is really interesting. Sperm whale clans and human societies, I think, have a fair amount to compare. So here are some of the parallels. They're both large, 20,000 females per clan in sperm whales. That's a lot. And human ethno-linguistic groups from a few hundred, say hunter-gatherers, to a few million in modern nations. The spatial spread, hundreds to thousands of kilometers in the sperm whale clans, 100 to 2,000 kilometers, perhaps more, in human ethno-linguistic groups. There are social barriers. Sperm whales only associate with members of their own clan, and we typically associate with members of our own ethno-linguistic groups. Both are anonymous. We don't know everyone who's a Canadian. We don't even know everyone who comes from our province. So there are symbolic markers which we can recognize and say, yes, this person is a fellow Englishman or Newfoundlander or whatever. And so there's parallels here. And I think that these sperm whale clans and human ethno-linguistic groups are more similar to each other than either is to a large-scale societal structure of any other species that I know of. That said, there is certainly contrast. We know about 12 distinctive behavioral attributes of different sperm whale clans. Now, there are undoubtedly a whole bunch more, but nothing like the countless differences between different human societies. Human ethno-linguistic groups can go back a maximum of about 350,000 years, which is when human language appeared. Sperm whale clans, well, we don't know, but it could be many millions of years. Sperm whales have been distinct for 24 million years. I doubt it goes back that far, but probably several million years. And there are differences in the way they're set up. So there's cooperative care of the offspring in both, but in humans, it includes mature males. So we can make comparisons with humans, but we need to be careful with anthropomorphism, and also its opposite, anthropodenial, where we deny human properties to other animals. But I'm waging on anyway. So spurred by this wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything, which is a new human history of humanity and basically gives the idea that given a vast array of anthropological and archaeological evidence, a lot of what people believed was wrong. And they present a wonderful novel story. It's a very easy read about what exactly happened in our past. So here are some of the lessons I get from this when I think of sperm whales. First, biologists typically see resource acquisition as a major driver of evolution, as anthropologists see something like agriculture as driving the increased complexity of human societies. Now, these guys show that second one is wrong as a universal process, and I think we may be wrong in the first one. So, for instance, I'm getting the picture, clans may or may not differ much ecologically. Human societies are enormously variable in how they're set up and in many, many other ways. And we should expect the same with clans. And we can make inferences by looking geographically. So we've learned a lot about human evolution by comparing Africa and Eurasia with the Americas. And we're beginning to learn quite a bit about sperm whales by comparing the Atlantic and Pacific. And in an upcoming work, the Indian Ocean is going to be brought into this. And then there can be special cases. So we've learned a vast amount about human ecology and evolution from Australia, which is largely separated from everywhere else. And the Mediterranean for the sperm whales has a similar role, I believe. Vocalizations and behavior. Ethno and linguistic do not always line up too well. So you can get places where there are two ethnic groups, but they speak the same language, like maybe in Northern Ireland, and the reverse, where you get a single ethnic group who speak a bunch of language, like maybe the Ashkenazi Jews. And similarly, the clans may have similar dialects, but distinct physical behavior, or vice versa. Human society was believed to be driven by males, maybe because most of those early anthropologists were men. But now it's clear that females have had a huge role in societal organization, leadership, and innovation. And in sperm whales, we've seen it the other way around. We have done very little work on males. We have believed everything's to do with females, but maybe these male sperm whales have more to offer than sperm. Finally, schismogenesis is a gorgeous word, and it means that humans individually or as groups define themselves against one another. And so you do something to contrast what someone else does. So Graeber and Wengrow note that holding slaves or not. So you may not hold slaves because your buddies do, or vice versa. You can have an autocratic system because your neighbors have a democratic one, and vice versa. So I wonder if some of the strong differences in clan behavior may be driven by this. So for instance, one of the biggest contrasts between the clans is the movement behavior in Galapagos, and it hardly overlaps. So maybe the wiggly regular clan wiggles so much because they don't want to be like the +1 clan whipping along in straight lines. Well, it was suggested to me when I proposed all this to my colleague Luke Rendell that only sperm whale scientists would be interested. So I tried to look at it from the other perspective. What could this possibly be useful for humans and those who study humans? Well, if we think of drivers of social complexity, all kinds have been produced for humans, from bipedalism to fire to opposable digits and so on, tool making, which have driven this social complexity of humans. And people have thought about it much less, but a bit for sperm whales, deep diving, brain size, and so on. If we look at these two lists and see what's in common, maybe these are the ones that are at least partially behind why these two species have produced these remarkable societies in scale and in anonymity. So mobility, cooperation, large brains, and capacity for culture. So, to conclude, these sperm whale clans have many members and cover large areas. They have distinctive cultural behavior. These clans delineate social relationships, and perhaps they're most comparable to human ethno-linguistic groups. So they're anonymous societies. And we can take some of the ideas that have come out of all these studies of human social evolution to perhaps guide us as we start to look in more detail at sperm whale clans. And then the traits that these two species share may be good candidates for drivers of large-scale social structures. So yeah, I'd like to thank all the people who helped collect the data, those who helped analyze it, and those who've commented and helped work on these latest ideas. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'll try and answer them.
All right, we have time for a few questions if anybody has any.
Awesome. Can I ask from here?
Yeah, let's see if I can.
All right. Hello, hello, Dr. Whitehead. Thank you so much. That was great. Can you hear me fine?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, so apart from the vocal cultural differences you saw between certain clans, were there any non-vocal behaviors that were distinct per clan or per group? Because I think of other cetaceans like dolphins, certain populations using tools to sweep the ocean floor, and then more recently the killer whales with the salmon on their head. Do you see anything like that with the sperm whales?
Nothing is often obvious and kind of nice as those, but out of our analyses, yes, something's come. So, for instance, the difference in social behavior, the synchrony of their dives. So, the +1 animals spreading out their dives. So one dives, wait a bit, another one, and so on. The regular ones all diving together. The way they move around. So the +1 ones moving in straight lines, the regular ones wiggling about here and there. Yeah, so there are a few like that, but I haven't seen anything quite as great as those two examples you gave.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. You spoke mostly about the social units being females and how calves will learn from their mothers and such. Does that translate over into the males? They are very sort of much more solo, you could say. They also retain these say dialects and such.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we do not know the answer, but it's something we want to work on. So basically, I didn't talk about males at all, but very briefly, what happens is the young male is in the group, in the social unit with his mother and his female relatives until he's maybe around 10, 12 years old. And during that time, he seems to take a reasonably social, role with the others. So he will babysit, he will play with the babies. He obviously can't allosuckle, but he will do much of the rest. And then about 10 or so, he starts to become more distant socially from his female relatives. And then he starts moving to higher latitudes. And there's been a neat study by Hayao Gayabashi in Japan, who studied males at the south end of Japan when they're quite young, fairly recently left their social units. And they're pretty social. They form you know, groups, nothing like the ones I showed a video of, but you know, they are social. They're with others quite a lot of the time. At the northern end of Japan, bit colder, bit higher latitude, a bit bigger males, and they're getting less social. They still have buddies, but they're just like one or two. And then as they get bigger and bigger, they move to higher and higher latitudes. And if you're up in Baffin Bay, you will see huge great male sperm whales there, usually by themselves. Then they come back at some rate we do not understand to the tropics to mate. At that point, they've grown to 3 times the mass of the females. They're so huge. They were originally thought a different species, and they mate with the females. The whalers originally thought it was a harem system because I think that appealed to them. But it turned out when we followed them that it wasn't like that at all, and it looks like it's female choice. The females like some males and not other males, and therefore mate with them. But there's a lot we don't understand, and particularly the question you asked is really interesting. Do the males retain some part of their identity of the clan they were born into? And if so, does that direct any of their life further on in which other males they associate with, who they mate with? And the massive scrambling of the nuclear genes suggests that they may, or maybe the females, choose to mate with males who originate from different clans.
You for the answer.
All right, we got one question online. Tyler, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, Hal. It's Tyler Eddy here. You're bringing me back to marine mammalogy undergraduate class at Dalhousie University, sitting in the front row with a very keen Katie McCullough. So thank you.
Oh, wow.
That was lovely. I was really interested to hear the update. And another class that I took back in my undergrad days at Dal was animal behavior with Marty Leonard, and she always cautioned us to not compare behaviors that we're observing in animal populations with human populations. And it seems like that's not the case for your study. So I'm just wondering if that sort of line of thinking has changed, or if you get pushback, and how these kind of how this works in the academic world in terms of making these comparisons. Thank you.
It's a very good question. And I think it has changed, but there's still pushback. I think what has happened is a lot of the things that we thought were exclusive to humans have been shown not to be. And this includes behavioral stuff. And so, for instance, the symbolic marking, which was a characteristic that some anthropologists put out as defining of human society in contrast to the societies of non-humans. We now seem to find that it isn't unique to humans, that other species have it, probably not too many, but looks like the sperm whales do, and quite likely a few other species. This means that we can, I think about some of these aspects which are really interesting to us because they seem to be very special and very important to our world, but use what's going on in other species to try and get a little bit of a handle on them. So culture has been another thing. If you go back to when you were an undergrad, the idea that there was culture in any other species was highly fought over, and might just be accepted for birdsong and a few things chimpanzees do. But it's now recognized that culture, i.e. socially learned behavior, is common in the animal kingdom, from ants to fish to whales and chimpanzees, and has a big role in quite a lot of animals' lives. but that brings up the idea, not we can't compare with humans because we're cultural and they aren't, but how is our culture different from them or different from most of them, and why might that be? Which tells us about our evolution, I think, and that was part of what I was trying to get at here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for the presentation. I could see the benefits of comparing humans with other species too for conservation efforts to try to get other people interested in protecting the species. So I'm just wondering, with your research, if you've noticed an increase in interest in protecting the species from just learning about them.
Yeah. So, sorry, did you have some more to say? No.
Nope, that's
No.
it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yes. So, one of the ideas that a few colleagues and I put out in the about 20 years ago was that culture of animals could be important to conservation. Culture of humans is clearly important to conservation because what we do is the problem usually. It's progressed a lot, and now a lot of other people are looking at it from the perspective of a lot of other animals. The sperm whale clans that I've been talking about have become kind of a poster child for this in one context. And that's the Convention on Migratory Species, which looks at species which cross international boundaries. And the sperm whale clans do that, and they cross the boundaries of nation states which are members of that convention, which Canada isn't, unfortunately. And so the sperm whale clans of the Southeast Pacific have been kind of the poster child for this, and trying to figure out how this division of the population into clans may affect the conservation of the sperm whales and how humans should deal with them. Because it's very likely that different behaviors will make the animals more or less vulnerable to what we're doing. And I showed you in the presentation that the two clans I focused on, one seems to do relatively better when the water's warm, and warming waters is something that's happening. So that diversity of being able to deal with it with changing environments may be important to the whales as we systematically change their environments. And it goes to other species. You're in Newfoundland, so one of the hypotheses for the lack of recovery of the codfish is that the fishery took nearly all the big animals, and the cod make seasonal migrations between breeding and feeding grounds, and these are probably really important. But the way it seems to be for them and some other fish is that the young animals follow the older animals and so learn the route. If you get rid of all the older animals, you destroy the knowledge on where to go. And so one hypothesis which may have contributed to the lack of recovery of the cod is that the knowledge of where to go and when to go disappeared with the destruction of all the older cod.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's all we have time for, so I'm going to start wrapping it up. Thank you, Dr. Whitehead, for that really interesting talk, and to everyone who joined us online and in person. Our next seminar will be this time next week, Wednesday, February 12th at noon, and we'll be hearing from Dr. Stephen Miller from the Marine Stewardship Council. All right.
Thank you.